10. A mere 5 years or so after the incident with the man from the flying machine, Oscar had emerged from under a pile of leaves into the twilight end of a long summer's day. All the undead skeleton animals also woke up and silently emerged into the gathering shadows. Oscar had happened to glance up at the branch of a tree where a blackbird had its nest. It had been the perceived wisdom when he'd been a human being that animals and birds avoided places where things like he now was lurked. He had never found this to be the case. The blackbird was perched on a branch, and he could feel the little creature's thoughts. Confusion and a sense of distress. The bird's feelings were already fading, would soon fade to merciful nothingness. All the chicks were dead, drowned. There had been a summer thunderstorm during the day, a real cloudburst. How many times over the centuries had he seen birds like this? They died and were replaced by others of the same kind. He had killed them countless times from pure spite, smashed and scattered the nests. They came back. They would come again. Futile little things that tried to care and protect other, even littler and more helpless things. And somehow these thoughts became mixed with thoughts of the Germans from the flying machine, and thoughts of Lord Henry, who he loathed now with all his being. From Lord Henry to the equally disgusting man who had sent the German flyers forth, then back to the blackbird again, who had now flown away. Somehow, all this made him think of something that had happened not long after he had seen the first of the horseless carriages. Early on one evening like this, a little boy had wandered near the base of his hill. He had been playing with a stick, happily prattling to himself, and sometimes stopping to make marks on the earth with the stick. He was a swarthy, foreign-looking little fellow, probably one of the gypsies who sometimes travelled through the region at that time. In life, Lord Henry had had no interest in children. They had simply been incomplete versions of the people he believed it was his right to command. Besides, they bored him, and in those days died like flies. But wandering Oscar had come down the hill and suddenly stood gibbering before the child. He'd had some of his dogs appear with their bare, snapping, clacking jaws. The boy had had a fit, lay on the ground and shook and jerked like a landed fish. Oscar had then simply left him there. When he came back in the dawn, the child was gone. No doubt he'd been found, as no doubt he'd spend the rest of his life, if he lived, in voiceless imbecility. The thoughts and memories turned in his mind, and although he hated modern English, he remembered part of a poem he had read in a book one of the spoiled soft moderns had thrown from a horseless carriage. He had thought the poem was almost good. He said some of it aloud. Yet each man kills the thing he loves. All Lord Henry had ever loved was himself, and he had destroyed himself long ago. In his strange, hissing, sibilant voice, Oscar softly said, "Although I was a soul in pain." The blackbird flew back to its nest. Oscar fell to his knees. His pain had been a sea, but a final drop had fallen, and it became an ocean. All the oceans. And out of the depths, something rose that swamped and bore under the hate and the rage. It was an ark. It had been made over a very long time. Made unsuspected, of heavy timbers, sadness, regret, and most surprisingly of all, contrition, terrible contrition. It had taken a long time. There had not been much in Henry the Quarterly to work with. The physical pain remained, but this ark rose and floated atop the ocean of misery. Although he had no real eyes, real tears flowed from the empty sockets. "I am so very sorry," he was. 11. That had been at least 50 years ago. During that time, he did not let people see him. There had only been one murderer, a man who had murdered another man for the most unoriginal of reasons, a woman. As in so many other ways, the modern people had become, it seemed, in this respect, lazy and soft. In much the same way, they hardly ever walked about anymore as compared to their ancestors. 12. For a few years, Oscar had been aware that someone had been burying things nearby. At least 4, maybe 5. He knew what the things were, but only roughly, like a thing seen from the corner of the eye. The things lay a few tantalizing miles beyond the barrier. Several times he felt a presence that made him very hungry, but always, likewise, on the wrong side of the barrier. Then one night he was down beside the new road, the little one that led to the new unlovely white boxy dwellings with the ridiculous name of bungalows. Built a tiny 30 years before, the road and houses were just outside Oscar's territory. Oscar was looking at one of the papery things, reading comfortably in the darkness. He had just had a rabbit, and his pain was eased. He had reached the point now, after nearly 5 centuries, where the pain was sometimes like an annoying itch. In the papery thing, one of the artisans who tended the horseless carriages was complaining. The problem was always the parts. Oscar nodded in agreement, and all his friends nodded too. He had always suspected it had been the Mohammedan hands. Then he had sensed the homicide, knew that the killer was coming back from the place where the things were buried, to where he lived tantalizingly close. The little road to the ugly white dwellings joined the big road in a location frustratingly away from Oscar's hill and the area he could roam in. But here, on this small rising field, they were both visible. The murderer passed by in a shiny red horseless carriage. They opened one of the red carriage's windows and threw something out. The something fell just inside the barrier. The man was florid-faced with white hair and beard. Rather than going near and becoming still, Oscar sent a fox to retrieve it. Soon the fox was back and dropped it at his feet. It was, he supposed, a kind of puppet, but it was made like a ridiculous realization of a pink bear. He had seen such things before and thought them in poor taste. He associated bears with dogs and pits, trips to bawdy houses. He picked it up and it spoke to him. He knew everything. The man who had discarded it like trash was one of those fellows who was the jolliest, Frenchiest of loud jack of the town fellow, well met, backslappers to some. To others, his underlings, and those he considered weak, a Tartar, a terror. He would be a crawling, sycophantic piece of night soil to those he considered above. To Lord Henry, he would have got down and kissed the ground in front of him, but also betrayed him without a second's thought if the opportunity had presented. He also knew what else the man was, knew what he had done. He had done the things far from home and buried what was left where he had, as trophies, so he could be nearby and come and gloat. Oscar's chance had come, finally, after all these years. He was glad it was a man like this. Oscar had no mill wheel. There was not even one left from the old times. But one of the wheels from one of the big carriages lay in a ditch. He could fill it with stones. He also had no way to get near the sea, but an old flooded quarry lay to the west. It would serve. 13. Mr. Simon Beale was a worried man. No, he thought, not worried. Frightened. All his life his response to fear had also been anger. People had been seeing things. Things. By the road, down to his house, mortgage nearly paid up. In the field on the slight rise, they said they had seen a little girl some distance back. A little girl in a reddish dress. She was said to have blonde hair, and she had been waving, holding something. When people had gone to investigate, they found nothing. Nothing. There had even been a thing in the local paper. There was even talk about ghosts, although the area was described as not a hotspot for paranormal activity. Simon rarely read books, but a few years before he had avidly read a book by a celebrated scientist. The book was about how certain things could absolutely, categorically not be. He had read and said to himself again and again, "That's it, exactly what I think." It was true. He had rejected these things ever since he had prayed to the God of his grandparents for things he wanted and nothing happened, and he had come to reject them for other reasons as he got older. Now he had started to think things he considered weak. And he wasn't weak. And he was getting angry. So enough was enough. He would go and have a look. He happened to know the sightings seemed to be happening on certain dates. It was one of the most disturbing things about the entire business, as was the color of the dress and the color of the girl's hair. Besides, there were always other reasons for him to go and look at a place where a child was. Somehow, he wasn't surprised when he saw her. A small figure, far too narrow-shouldered to be an adult. In the gathering gloom, it was difficult to make out details. He parked the car and got out and climbed over the fence. A warm summer evening, getting late. He walked into the field and waved back, called out reassuringly in a friendly voice. He got to a kind of dip and lost sight of her, climbed up and almost laughed. It was an old scarecrow in red rags, with some yellow rags on its head. He almost laughed with relief. It must have been blowing in the wind. He wondered what it was doing there. There had never been any crops in the field. But do scarecrows have for heads a dirty skull thing with evil glowing green eyes? Do they stand up tall and rip the old red towel and yellow rags they have disguised themselves with away? Do they howl in triumph? He was trying to run when the horrible thing raised a skeleton hand and clicked its fingers. A kind of huge hood of tangled, moving, writhing bones rose. It seemed to flow up from the ground. With the clarity that sometimes comes with stark terror, he registered that it jumped with hundreds of little things that looked like skeleton mice and rats. They were like fleas on the hide of a huge beast. Then the hood fell on him and swept him away. He came to in a clearing, trees all round, lying on a bit of stony, weedy ground. It was nearly full dark. Simon had spent a short, ill-advised time in the army. People had told him what to do all the time. Him, mortgage nearly paid up. Also, certain opportunities he had believed would exist did not. Some of the people who had told him what to do had been men from what was once called old families. He had hated them all. They all walked with a certain indefinable way about them, an infuriating aura. And the horrible thing that now emerged from the trees and walked towards him moved in that same indefinable way. Even the way it adjusted the rotting black rags that clothed it was the same. He found he couldn't move. Horrible bone things held him down. He tried to scream, and a thing bit his tongue. It tasted of dirt and chalk. He lost control of his body. The walking thing with the green eyes reached him and spoke. "Thou shalt now go to hell forevermore, for The words were spoken in a hissing voice that was somehow matter-of-fact. "And hell is deep." Simon did manage to speak then. He whimpered, "Mommy." At this, the horrible thing struck him a terrible backhanded blow that shattered his jaw and laid the flesh open to the teeth in rugged strips. 14. The man was dead, with the wheel full of stones round his neck, the body at the bottom of the flooded quarry. It was nearly dawn, and Oscar would have to go into the ground. He climbed back up the hill to his clearing, and all his friends fell to the ground and stopped moving. They began to disappear, to turn to dust. For a moment, he felt them, felt the terrible tiredness of the long, long years. For just a moment, he also felt them as they had once been long ago. Little blind things curled up inside their mothers. Things that hardly moved inside eggs. Hooves that had only floated in warm water. Then sleep and peace. They were gone. He was dazzled by the rising sun and held up a hand to shield his face against the light. And it was a real hand, with skin and flesh. Incredulously, he felt his face. He had a face again. Lord Henry de Courtenay stood silent in the clearing, staring in amazement at his own hands. He was dressed as he had been long ago, in his old court clothes. It was some time before he noticed the children. A boy and a girl stood near him, holding hands. The little girl was about 8 and clutched a ridiculous puppet of an animal. The boy was the same one he had frightened into a fit in the woods all those years before. Lord Henry fell to his knees before the boy. He tried to speak. The child laid a hand on his shoulder. "It's done, Henry. Come with us. We're going on a journey." They walked from the clearing. Behind them, something turned to dust and blew away in the dawn breeze.